I used to think incarcerated people were criminals, only to find out 90% of the people who were in there were victims, were poor. It was circumstances. It was their social economic status. And that really opened my eyes, and it changed my lens of how I looked at incarcerated people. But it also truly made me have a resolve that we truly, truly need to do something.
This is the Women Beyond Walls podcast, and I'm lawyer and activist Sabrina Matani. Around the world, nearly 1 million women are behind bars, and that number is rising. Often, this is not for serious crimes, but because they are poor, because they've survived violence, or because the system failed them long before a conviction.
Stand up. We've got to stand up.
In this second season of the podcast, I speak with women who have lived through incarceration, as well as those reimagining what justice could look like. I'm thrilled to start off by speaking to Teresa Njoroge. She is the founder of Clean Start Africa, a non-profit based in Kenya that works with women and children impacted by imprisonment. Teresa founded the organization after spending a year in prison, where she was incarcerated with her 3-month-old daughter. That is an experience which they both carry with them to this day.
My daughter is 14 and she cannot sleep comfortably with lights off. Why? In prison, lights don't go off and you don't see darkness. So all she knows is light. She has never been comfortable with darkness because she never got to experience that when she was growing up. And these are some of the things we are unable to reverse.
Can you tell us about that day that you were arrested, which, really changed the course of your life?
Wow, Sabrina, seems like it was just yesterday, a decade into growing my banking career. And, this was the height of celebrating the hard work that I had put in school, going to college and getting a banking and finance degree, and finally getting the jobs, not only within the banking sector, but rising to be a manager within the banking sector here in Kenya. And a decade into it, I happened to handle a fraudulent transaction unknowingly. And this is what led to my malicious arrest. And I say malicious because the arresting officer knew too well that I hadn't committed the crimes that he was arresting me for. And even though he knew that, he did ask me to pay him bribes. But Sabrina, when you know your values, it's very easy to make a decision. And so I said, no, I wasn't going to pay the bribes, especially because he knew that this was a false arrest. But unfortunately, when I said no to paying the bribes, he then ended up taking me through a wrongful prosecution. And closer to judgment of that prosecution, he asked me for a bribe again. And when I said no, unfortunately, I was wrongfully convicted to serve a year's sentence at the largest correctional facility for women here in Kenya, Langata Women Maximum Prison. And unfortunately, I served this sentence accompanied by my then 3-month-old daughter, which was such a grueling experience. So my life turned around. One day, I was growing my career, a law-abiding citizen. And then 2.5 years later, post this malicious prosecution, I find myself at the largest correctional facility for women, serving a year sentence for a crime that I hadn't committed. My life changed.
Oh my goodness, Teresa. It's just unthinkable, that this could happen. And I can just hear from your voice, even though it's been some time ago, just the anguish and how frightening that was. And during this 2-year period when your case was ongoing, were you held in pretrial detention or were you out on bail?
So immediately he arrested me. I was put in remand and I had to raise bail to then leave remand. So I stayed in remand for a while as my family was trying to source for a lawyer to represent me, also raise the cash bill that I had been asked to pay. And once all this was put in place, I got out after they had paid the cash bill. And that's how for these 2.5 years, luckily, I was able to, attend my court case while on bail.
Lucky might sound like a strange term to describe Teresa's experience, but it's true. She was able to come up with the money to pay bail, but for many women, that's not the case. Almost 30% of women worldwide are held in pre-trial detention, though the number is likely higher due to lack of accurate data. In some regions, women face a higher risk of pre-trial detention than men. Most are there for low-level, non-violent offences like minor theft. Women tend to be poorer than men on average, especially those who are single mothers or caregivers. So even small bail amounts are often out of reach, leaving women stuck detained and awaiting trial for months or even years.
When I went into Langata, the remand section, and my heart broke so much because I met these hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of women who were sitting in there just because they couldn't afford very little bail money. And the reason why they couldn't afford this bail money is because, first and foremost, what got them into remand were very petty offenses, survival petty crimes. They were, selling their wares as hawkers in the streets. They had come in on loitering charges. And given the high rates of unemployment, high rates of poverty, they're trying to fend for themselves and for their children. And, when they get arrested, they can't afford legal representation. On the other hand, they cannot afford to pay this cash bill. So they're sitting in remand, waiting for court dates for their case to be heard. And it's a very desperate situation because they cannot see any way out. But more heartbreaking is the fact that they're mothers. And so their children are waiting for them.
Yeah.
And so the children are in such dire situations without their sole caregiver. So it was really a heartbreaking situation. But, I was grateful that my family got me out on cash bail, but I had already started learning the issues and challenges that these vulnerable women go through when they get into the justice system.
Yeah, thank you, Teresa. I think you summarize it so well that, so many women are being imprisoned simply for being poor, not because of, anything else, just rather vulnerability and marginalization. And Teresa, you mentioned that you had given birth to a baby girl just a few months before your conviction and you had to take your daughter to prison with you. What was the impact of this on you as a new mother?
It was tough. Remember, this was my firstborn daughter, so I was still learning how to be a mother. And, I was just 3 months post being blessed with my daughter. By the way, her name is Oma. In my dialect, that means truth and justice.
What a beautiful name. She's going to be another social justice warrior.
Indeed, that's what I believe. And, she's got a lot of interest. She's just turned 14 years now. So we're now having to deal with the teenage phase of her life, which is such a blessing. But, in prison, you don't have access to a lot of the essentials that you need, from food, unfortunately, to things like running water, the hygiene and the nutrition and the environment was not conducive at all for an infant. And it's very unfortunate to say that I found other children who had accompanied their mothers into prison. So when it came to how we were bringing up our children behind bars, it was so tough. Well, if you're talking about things like immunization, the language behind bars, children so innocent do not learn, how to say please, thank you, hello, good morning, because they're observing the fights that are happening behind bars. They're observing such crude language, cruel behavior. It was so difficult to shield my daughter from experiencing this. But that was a tall order, because how do you shield them from a space where the language and what they're seeing, because remember, prison has no privacy at all.
Yeah.
So we were all lumped together, mothers and children. So the impact of a child accompanying their mom into incarceration takes years on end to reverse. There's just so much more, from the language to health, education. They're so left behind. I mean, I left incarceration knowing too well that I had to do something, because it was so wrong to see innocent children, not their crime, yet their sentence. And it's a whole generation that's being affected by this.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for sharing that and just how hard that was. And I completely agree with you. I think children of incarcerated parents are often the invisible victims. We don't see often, the impact it has on those children. But, there's lots of research that shows there can be, as you mentioned, really long lasting kind of devastating impacts. And I think we don't even have enough data actually on how many children are being impacted. I know a UN study from 2019 said there's almost 19,000 children worldwide detained with a parent, mostly their mothers. And as you may know, that was also my own journey into this work, because my father was imprisoned in Zambia when I was a teenager, older than your daughter. I was about 17. But, that experience has had a lifelong impact on me. I mean, a positive one, and it sort of really fuels the work I do. But absolutely, in terms of anxiety or depression, those come from those days. But I think, this is even greater when it's a woman who's in prison, when a mother's still play so many of a caregiving role across the world, particularly if it's younger children, like they really need their mother. So I think the impact when we imprison women is so much greater. I remember a woman once told me, when you imprison a woman, you imprison a family. And I really think that's so true.
Indeed, Sabrina. And what people don't see is the fact that when you incarcerate this one person, it's not just that person who goes to prison. Her or his entire family are incarcerated, even though outside those walls, it affects the entire family. And that's why to the magistrates and to the judges and to the police and all duty bearers and right holders, you've got to be certain beyond reasonable doubt that indeed this is the right decision to make, because it's a decision once made impacts and affects so many other people negatively.
Like Teresa, many women are mothers and either take their young children to prison with them or have to leave them behind. Either way, a painful choice. What's especially heartbreaking is that many women end up imprisoned precisely because they were doing whatever they could to get by and take care of their families. Teresa met and connected with many of these women during her time in prison.
I thought to myself, I have had such a negative lens of bias towards incarcerated people, because I used to think incarcerated people were criminals, only to find out 90% of the people who were in there were victims, were poor. It was circumstances. It was their social economic status. And that really opened my eyes, and it changed my lens of how I looked at incarcerated people. But it also truly made me have a resolve that we truly, truly need to do something to see to it that prisons are not used to punish the vulnerable. It was hundreds of stories, and the common denominator, vulnerability, social economic status, poverty, those who have been marginalized. It was truly, truly heartbreaking.
That's such an important point you raised, Teresa. I think many people believe this myth that bad people go into prison and come out good. But actually, prison is such a place of trauma and just looking at people who are vulnerable, as you've mentioned. And often people come out even more, vulnerable and traumatized and marginalized. Teresa was released from prison in late 2011, but it took several months before the Court of Appeal officially ruled her conviction wrongful. Like many other women, when Teresa came out of prison, she struggled to find a job and to rebuild her community.
There's a lot of advocacy we need to do to create awareness. And that is one of the things that I say to myself that I had to do upon leaving Langata Women Maximum Prison, was to create awareness of the issues of incarceration and the challenges of reintegration. Because, Sabrina, people do not understand that overcoming the incarceration period is actually easier than navigating reintegration, because reintegration is so much difficult. Remember, this woman has been so much trauma, so much pain from the day they got arrested and for whatever period of time that they have been away while their freedom had been taken away, their dignity, their esteem, and so much more being separated from the outside world. But having said that and what they've been through, when they come out, it's the stigmatization. The outside world, instead of approaching these people with empathy, with compassion, with understanding, they stigmatize them. They've got fear that, oh, you could be a murderer. You could be a thief. I do not want you in my community. The last thing this person wants is to be stigmatized, is to be separated from community. Yeah. They've done a hard job of surviving incarceration. They want to be supported when it comes to reintegration. But even the system itself does not offer support when it comes to reintegration, whether it's jobs, whether it's safe landing in terms of safe housing. Yeah. The barriers that stand in the way for formerly incarcerated women and men. Yeah. The system doesn't make it any easier. So I think as much as incarceration is difficult, we underestimate how much more difficult reintegration is. And this is the rest of your life. Yeah. Parents are trying to rebond with their children who don't understand, where have you been? I've been expecting you to parent me, but you weren't there. And these children have been through their own traumas as well. So there's that burden as well on this parent. And Sabrina, that's why we have very high rates of recidivism. That's why these people would rather go back to prison. Yeah. So let's look into reintegration as much as we're looking at the issues of incarceration.
Inspired to do something to change the circumstances of other women affected by incarceration, Teresa launched Clean Start Africa. The majority of people working for the organisation are formerly incarcerated women, and it operates programs in 20 prisons across Kenya. Their goal is to help women heal from trauma, create economic empowerment opportunities, and to imagine new futures for themselves. Clean Start also works with women after release through regional community groups, providing ongoing support and connection. I visited Clean Start Africa back in 2022 and met many courageous women who are rebuilding their lives after prison and supporting others. I remember hearing about Emma, a woman Clean Start was supporting. She was arrested for selling food on the street without a license, something she simply couldn't afford. She was just trying to feed her family, but after her arrest, they too suffered.
I've got incredible news for you, Sabrina. Emma is now one of our trainers of trainers and a leader in our community.
Oh, that is the best news I've heard in a while. I'm so delighted to hear about Emma still working with you and that, she is now being able to kind of rebuild her life after such a horrible and terrible experience. And to share her story, and I have to come to Kenya now. I have even more reasons to come again to visit you.
Ooh.
It's been too long.
We've got lots to show you, Sabrina.
Yes, I'm going to look into booking my ticket soon. Another reason I want to go back to Kenya is to see up close the policy changes Clean Start Africa and other civil society groups are pushing for, such as the International Commission of Jurists in Kenya. Though it is early days yet, they're backing a bill that would decriminalise and declassify several minor offences that disproportionately affect marginalised groups, particularly women. If it goes through, many of these minor offences would not be criminal offences at all, and for others, there would be alternatives to incarceration, such as community service.
So that will be such an incredible win for Kenya. And I believe if it works in Kenya, it definitely will spiral into other African countries and beyond.
Teresa, thank you for kind of reminding us of the hope that's happening and all of the potential. I think that's so important to keep us going in some of the really dark times. Of course, the rate of women's incarceration is growing at an alarming rate, and we'll soon reach 1 million women in prison worldwide if action isn't taken. And so for those new to this issue, maybe there's listeners who it's their first time listening to this podcast, why would you say that this is a global gender injustice that needs to be taken much more seriously?
The rates of incarceration of women is rising, and this is an area that's not really given a lot of priority. According to the research that we have done, 90% of the women who go through incarceration are mothers and the sole caregiver. So when we put them behind bars, we are leaving 3 to 4 children per woman unattended without their primary caregiver. Now, what I mean, Sabrina, is that when we send this woman behind bars, these 3 to 4 children, that's the very same day when mom goes into incarceration, they risk abuse that very night. They risk sleeping in the streets that very night. Similarly, most of these women are leaders in their extended families as well. And so when you put this woman behind bars, you're literally leaving a huge gap in that family. And the bottom line, Sabrina, is the fact that they are not criminals. So a number of us, a number of key players and stakeholders needs to put attention into this matter, because what we're doing is that we're harming these women further, but at the same time, we are creating a whole generation of future, whether it's the children or other family members who are now impacted by the justice system. And we are creating a spiral impact that doesn't end when this woman comes out of incarceration. It's also things to do with the taxes that we're spending. But we're spending these taxes to incarcerate these women as opposed to using these taxes to empower them. And I cannot overemphasize the importance and the need of people to give attention to the justice impacted community, especially knowing the traumas that they go through and how difficult it is to reintegrate and rebuild one's life without any kind of support. And so we need a lot of support. We need a lot of support in this space, whether it's to reform the criminal justice space, whether it's to support those who have been justice impacted directly, or investing in communities so that we're not having these issues in the very first place. That would be my recommendation. Yeah.
That's a really powerful recommendation, Teresa. I wholeheartedly agree with everything you said. And particularly when you talk about the impact on children and even children left outside. I remember visiting the children of a woman in prison. She had no idea what had happened to her children. She was so anxious. And so I said I would go and look and try and find out about what had happened to them. And, the neighbor had just taken the children in, and one of the girls had gone to the street to sell, to try and make some money, and they had never seen her again. She never came back. No one knows what happened to her. This was when I was working in Sierra Leone. And I think that's always stayed with me, because there's such this like long-term impact, this terrible impact that's happening on children who are often invisibilized. And I fully agree that I think you put it so perfectly, that instead of spending money on imprisoning women and causing harm, we should be investing in kind of issues that lead them into contact with the criminal justice system in the first place. So absolutely agree with you there. And Clean Start has created such an incredible impact in Kenya. What advice would you give to others who maybe want to try and create some change in their own communities to try and, create change for justice impacted women?
Yeah. First, Sabrina, is to know that we're all deserving of a second chance. First and foremost, each and every person is deserving of a second chance. And having said that, the justice impacted women, girls, and children. And what that means is that they've already paid the price of whatever it is that got them there in the first place. So we need to stop wearing a biased lens and understand that given the fact that they've already paid the price, the best we could do is accord them a genuine second chance. And to be very honest, for most of these people, it's not even a second chance. It's a genuine first chance, because they never had a first chance in the first place. They didn't have a first chance into quality education. They didn't have opportunities or access when it came to employment and decent means of livelihood, So honestly speaking, let's accord empathy. Let's accord them understanding to governments and other people in power. Let's think about how we are addressing social economic issues. Because Sabrina, it's so wrong to use a justice lens to address social economic issues.
Yeah.
There is no way we're going to address poverty or high unemployment rates using a criminal justice lens. That is not possible. But we're using that lens of the criminal justice lens to address these issues, unfortunately, to the very vulnerable who we have chosen to silence. And that is very wrong. So let's address our social economic issues the way we are meant to address them. Let us care for our vulnerable and the marginalized. Let's address the inequalities in our communities. Let's address the inequalities in our societies. We can all do something to leave this world more just, more equitable. And if everyone does something, then we will reduce and end the injustice that is currently happening to the most vulnerable in our communities and our societies.
Stand up. We've got to stand up.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Women Beyond Walls. To find out more about Teresa Njoroge, Clean Start Africa, the research mentioned in this episode, or about the impact of poverty and criminalization on women globally, visit our website at womenbeyondwalls.org. This episode is edited by Human Group Media, a podcast company for social change and impact. To learn more about their work, please visit humangroupmedia.com. On this episode, we are thankful for the assistance of Laura Cook as executive producer, and to Lady Unchained and Miri for the use of their song, which accompanies all podcast episodes in the series. If you love the song as much as we do, visit unchained.org.uk. Unchained runs an artistic mentoring platform for people with lived experience of the criminal legal system. If you enjoyed this episode of Women Beyond Walls, we encourage you to pass it on and share with friends. And if you have time, we would really appreciate your reviews on your podcast platform.